The first topic brought to you by Anthony. Anthony, do you want to kind of set it up a little bit for us?
Okay, sure. So the more and more I've delved into the ideas of anarcho-capitalism, the more I've thought, well, there would be no essential public land. Like you could have potentially shared land, but it would be owned by somebody or a group of people, but it would still be centrally owned by somebody. Like somebody could open their land to use for the public if they wanted, because it's their land. But what would you do for travel? Like you'd almost always have to be traveling over somebody else's land to get somewhere. Like, to give you the most clear example of where this might be an issue, I believe you the homesteading problem. So like, let's say you had a piece of land and it was entirely surrounded by somebody else's land. What right per se would you have to cross this other person's land in a peaceful manner to get to the grocery store, to get to the town, to get somewhere else, to visit your friend, whatever? Like, what right would you have to cross that land in a non-destructive, peaceful fashion? You know,
Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, because I feel like you would, but then it also seems to lead to some interesting ideas about what rights do you have to stop trespassing, and where do those rights come from, and what defines them exactly. You know what I mean?
Sure. This is a huge topic. Like we could go anywhere you want with it, from my roads, all the way to, doorbell bombs.
We all know that true libertarians don't need roads. We levitate off of the pure hatred of the state.
Right. So like specifically the donut homesteading problem, let's call it the problem, because it's kind of, it's both a great answer. It's like an objection that a lot of leftists' minds encounter when they're thinking about private, quote unquote, private property being the dominant paradigm. And it's also a great answer. Sorry, go ahead.
And understand, I don't ask this question because I think because I have a strong opinion about it. I ask this question because it's a question that I've struggled with. I think it's a hard question, at least for me, to like wrap my head around exactly where do property rights land when it comes to this kind of a thing. You know what I mean? Yeah.
So let me kind of brain dump on it a little bit, and you can poke at my brain dump. So the first thing that leads a lot of, and I'm not calling you a leftist, I'm just kind of exploring the topic.
Oh no, that's fine.
Leftists will quote Locke, John Locke, the Lockean property rules, and they'll quote something called the Lockean
fire.
Sorry?
And they don't burst into fire while doing so?
No. Have you heard of a thing called the Lockean proviso?
I have not.
So the three rules of property acquisition have an asterisk on them with Locke, from Locke. Separate it from nature. Get there first, separate it from nature, mix your labor with it. That's the Lockean kind of property norm. The asterisk is the proviso, is what it's called, the Lockean proviso. And it's that Locke says that if one person ever, comes to own all of a specific resource, well, now that becomes aggression, and the community can take the property, or, can take a piece of the property back. It's called the Lockean proviso. And so every time, capitalists quote Locke as the property rules, the leftists will be like, well, what about the proviso? And to be honest, most of the people on the right have never even heard about that. And so it's kind of like, it takes them off guard.
I haven't.
Because it puts them it puts them off guard, because they're just not familiar with Locke's work, and they're not familiar with all the work that's been done since Locke existed, especially with clarifying systems of property and what the property acquisition rules should be, and simplifying the property system. Did you have anything you wanted to say before I kind of continue my dump?
I guess no. I mean, like, I have heard of some of Locke's stuff. I did not hear about that part. That definitely got me off guard.
Yeah, so there's a few things wrong with Locke's conception of property that has been sort of clarified and reduced and boiled down and improved and refined since then.
Yeah.
The first problem, so you start with the three rules and then the proviso. The three rules are, get there first, separate it from nature, mix your labor with it. Well, 2 out of 3 of those rules are either superfluous or invalid, and I'll tell you why. Separate something from nature. That's a very subjective thing.
Yeah, I'm wondering what that means.
If you're wanting
what
to...
did he mean by it?
Exactly. So it could mean picking up a rock. You separate it from nature by picking up a rock. It could be building a fence around a piece of property. It could be drawing a line, in the sand. But what if, your use of the property restricts you from building fences? Or let's say like you specifically want the land to not be modified for some specific purpose, maybe renting out a good view, or maybe you want to be a worm farmer.
Yeah, like
maybe you hate fences.
Yeah, like I had a neighbor the one time who had done the whole government program "don't touch the land for so many years" thing, because he wanted to not touch the land, but he also was like, well, I'm going to make some money. Like in a anarcho-capitalist kind of way, you just would not touch the land if you wanted to preserve it like that.
Right.
You could set up a donations thing like, hey guys, I'm not touching my land. I'm preserving it.
Right.
Please donate to the nature preserve.
And so the reason why eliminating subjectivity from these rules is important. It's not just important. It is critical. It is a requirement. It is part of discussing a system of property.
Well, otherwise it can mean just whatever you want.
Right. But the thing is, if you're designing a property system, or if you're evaluating multiple different property systems, the thing that tells you if you have a good property system, the thing that would let you order a list of property systems into, best to worst, is how rivalrous they are, how much conflict their rules cause or prevent. Prevent is probably better, because the entire purpose of a property system is to reduce the inherent natural rivalrousness and fighting over limited resources. That is the entire purpose of a property system. If your property system doesn't do that, or doesn't do that well, then it is like definitionally not a property system, or a terrible property system. It's not good at being what it is supposed to be, right?
I'm thinking that's close, but the only thing that bugs me about that idea is like, what if you had an extremely totalitarian system that basically stopped all rivalry by saying everything's owned by the state. Anyone who disagrees faces the punishment. Well,
that would not reduce rivalrousness. That would just make everyone a victim.
True. That is true.
That would be maximal victimhood.
Yep, my exception doesn't stand. It's a good definition.
So it's important to eliminate. No, this is a conversation. Interrupt me anytime, please. I've talked about this by myself so many times. It's nice to have somebody else. So
I can relate.
Reducing messy rules is critical to designing a property system. The subjectivity of separate it from nature is hopelessly subjective. It is hopelessly flawed, hopelessly open to interpretation by whoever, whenever, changing societal norms, changing ideas, whatever. And it's not really necessary. The second one that can be eliminated for a very different reason. Because it's kind of circular reasoning to an invalid form of property. When it says mix your labor with something, and this is the one a lot of other people on the right aren't really familiar with.
You discussed this one with the copyright issue.
I did. So when you say you must mix your labor with a thing to make it yours, to achieve ownership of a piece of property, that inherently kind of means, and Locke believed this, that labor has an inherent value. Now we're right into the labor theory of value and all the problems and mess and invalid self-contradictory nonsense that comes with the labor theory of value. Are you familiar with that?
I am familiar. Do you want me to steal something from you with a piece of paper?
Please. Oh, you saw that video? No, that's a cool. I thought
did.
that was a great intellectual property video.
I found it to be very funny. Oh no, he has stolen all our paper, a little bit of the rights.
So, what was I saying? Okay, so mix your labor with it. It's just kind of, it's just like a weird rule. Again, it's subjective. What the hell does that mean? Does it mean look at something? Is that labor? Does it mean pick it up and put it back down? Does it mean you have to modify it? Well, what does modify it mean? Does it mean you have to totally transform it into something new? Does it mean 10%? Do you have to transform 10% of it? 5%? 2%? Rivalrousness.
Maybe you just have to push the button at the factory.
Right. These are points of contention. These are subjectivity. These are gray areas, and they are based on labor theory of value. That labor has some kind of that labor is property. Like, to mix labor with physical property, you have to think of labor as property. Labor is absolutely not property. It's not scarce. Yeah. It doesn't exist. It's not rivalrousness. It's not rivalrous. You can't transfer it. You can't steal it. It's not in any way property. You do not own your labor. And this is another thing that I say often. And even people on the right are like, whoa, we don't own our. No, it's not a valid form of property. Labor is using your actual property in an agreed upon way, usually for compensation. So if somebody pays me to mow their grass, I'm going to use my body property and my lawnmower property in an agreed upon way in exchange for money. My labor isn't the property. It's just me using my property in an agreed upon way. So, second rule, out the window. Messy, subjective, invalid, unnecessary. That leaves us with a single rule, which is first use. And I call that like neo-Lockean property. That is totally my word. I don't know if anybody else calls it that. It's just, I call it the neo-property, the neo-Lockean property norm, which is just first use, you own it. You get there first, you lick the handle, so to speak, and you own the car. And by eliminating the extra rules, we have eliminated points of contention. We have reduced the rivalrousness in our property system, thereby making it a better or best property system. The simpler it is, the less contentious, the less arguments, the less fighting, the better the property system. Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
So you would believe that people can inherit property from somebody else, correct?
Inherit just means that they gave it to them.
So, like, yes,
it's another way of saying
give it.
Given. Yeah.
Yeah, but they can give it.
Yeah, sure.
So I guess my question is like, let's say somebody explored all over the place and claimed lands that they never traveled to ever again. Would they actually own those lands?
So the final remaining point of subjectivity with the rule is what constitutes first use. Right? And so far, I haven't read anyone, and I have personally not been able to... Sorry, guys, I'm eating. I have not been able to clear up the remaining subjectivity left in that. Now, I just want to point out that the subjectivity left in that last rule exists in all other conceptions of property. So it's not like I've got a fatal flaw. No. I've got the same flaw that literally everybody else has. It's just I've got a lot less flaws that they have. And
but we would agree that like a lack of use could like some area of lack of use could constitute abandoned property.
I disagree. I think you just added a point of contention into the property system.
Okay, so
because what constitutes abandonment? What constitutes lack of use? You're making the property system worse again.
I'm not saying I know when it would happen.
Right.
I am saying that I think that. Oh, cool, infinite. That there would have to be something there because. Well, I'm just thinking about it because otherwise, wouldn't you potentially run into a system where somebody could claim land leave, never return, and just like move to the entire opposite side of the world, and with no intention of ever returning, and technically they're still the owner.
You don't think people should be able to do that? So like
I
if you
think
buy
people
if you
should
buy a
be
vacation
able to,
home,
in some sense.
like if you
But
buy a
I'm
vacation
I'm saying
home,
that there would be a certain point, like maybe after a few generations, even, I don't know. But like if they pass that on generation after generation, now we're at like, I don't know, 10 generations. Does it still hold? You know
what
I'm
if
saying?
it's an investment property? What if the whole point of the ownership
True.
was to grow it for a later use? What if they're waiting for the foliage to grow to a certain point that they can actually make use of it? And in the meantime, you know, they're keeping it, you know, safe.
That is a really good point. I don't.
The point is, like, when you add in the rule of
No,
abandonment,
I understand the issues of it. Like everyone
Right.
will try to abuse that idea, but I also think that there's
the other
potentially a
s-
problem.
the other
not
side of
having
that
abandoned
is
property?
like the ostracization side, right? So if somebody starts, you know, trying to cheese ownership of some vast quantity
Yeah.
of land, then, you know, they're probably going to be ejected from polite society, and, you know, they'll have to live by themselves
Yeah.
until they die of starvation or whatever on their vast tracts of land. But again, this is like an unrealistic scenario. Like, I don't think like walking across land would ever be considered using it. But again, this is inherently subjective, and I think
So
I think like the last thing I want to say on this part is that we have lived in like polite society. We're not really polite, but we've lived in like a peaceful, mostly not even peaceful. What am I trying to say? We don't live in the jungle. We have not lived in the jungle for so long that we're not used to thinking in terms of what reality actually is. And reality actually is like two guys on an island, you know, with fashioning clubs to try and survive. And there is no anvils that drop out of the sky when you do something evil. This is not me suggesting that we behave like that. This is just me kind of reminding people that the baseline is like animalistic, violent behavior. And to elevate yourself out of that, you have to find other people to reciprocate what we call rights with, which goes to our conversation that we had a couple days ago on the Discord server. And through this reciprocity, through this elevated thinking that is only possible by sentient beings, we elevate ourselves out of this violent animalistic behavior. And if you start doing really shitty stuff like claiming ownership of, you know, 100,000 acres of land just because you drove by it, I don't think that's going to fly. And I think you're going to start to get exempted from that reciprocity with a lot of people.
Okay, I think that kind of answers my question. Like it addresses the issue that I was concerned about. But I guess to the original point, so you wouldn't consider like traveling over land to be necessarily a rights violation, like in the donut example.
Oh, no. We haven't even got there yet. Like, that's trespassing.
No.
Like, if you're not allowed on my property and you drive on my property, you're violating my rights necessarily by making use of my property. Ownership, the definition of ownership is the right to exclude others from the use of a thing, from the use of a scarce resource. That's the best definition I've ever heard for what ownership means. The right to exclude others from the use of. So if you own a piece of property and somebody drives across it, they are infringing on your quote unquote right, your ownership rights to that piece of property. Did I answer your question?
I guess the question, I guess yes, but at the same time, I still have the question, like, it feels almost like you're having the person in prison, like depending on the size of the property. Like, let's say, you know,
I haven't even talked about the donut thing yet.
Prison.
So the thing
like
is,
in the donut example,
the thing is, and I also want to touch on positive versus negative obligations, because I think a lot of voluntarists and anarcho-capitalists get that wrong as well. But let me talk about the donut thing first, because it's a great illustration.
Okay.
The donut. People are telling me to poke him in the nose, but you know, my green screen stops like right here, so I can't do that. Anyway. So I mean, the rule is, you're allowed to use your property in whatever way you want, as long as you don't interfere in the use of other people's property. Don't damage, don't hurt people, don't take their stuff, don't interfere with the use of their property. That is the universalizable rule. That is the non-aggression principle. The basis of, pretty much all peaceful coexistence around property, right? And so I don't know why people think, and I'm not saying this is you, but a lot of people get stuck on this donut homesteading thing, especially the leftists. They think that it's a total defeat of private property because if the people need something bad enough, then they have the right to override private property.
I don't think it's a defeat of private property. I think that it's an area that needs to be addressed, Right. And so it's real easy to address. And I think this one's on its way out really quick because of how easy it is to address. Okay. So right here, I have a piece of property. I cannot use this piece of property. This is probably going to get me demonetized. I cannot use this piece of property in a way that negatively affects or, infringes on the property that you own. Right. That's the rule. Now, if I own real property, physical property, and I use that property to infringe on your use of, your access to, or your control of your property, well, that's breaking the exact same rule. Another way of applying the same rule is to say if I rightfully own a piece of rope, and I fashion that rope into a noose, I rightfully own that noose. But the moment I use my property in a way that harms you or your property, let's say by putting it around your neck, I am using my property in an invalid or immoral or a property ownership infringing way. So if I choose to purchase all the property around your house and then not allow you access to your property or not allow you off of your property, I've de facto imprisoned you. In the same way, I would have taken my rightfully owned noose and hung you with it. You can use your property, guns, nooses, and donut homestead, to hurt other people. Well, that's against the rules. I can't use my body to hurt you. I can't strangle you. I can't put my rightfully owned hands around your neck and, restrict your movement or affect your property or control your access to it. Because I actually like this argument a lot because it doesn't just solve this problem. It also seems to solve like water rights problems and so on. You don't have the right to poison the stream that leads on to the property because then you're harming that person. You're harming that person's property.
If they own a piece of the river or whatever, and you start polluting the water on their inside their property borders, let's say, yeah, sure. So and this is what now I want to talk about the positive versus negative rights thing, because I think people get this wrong. I think people have used it as a crutch, as a rhetorical tool to simplify discussions, and for that purpose, it's generally great. And I use it today too. I mean, it's fine, but I'm going to get nitpicky because it applies here. People say that positive obligations do not exist. Like unchosen, a priori, or involuntary positive obligations do not exist. And then you have this donut situation, and
where they would.
Like I had this conversation with Walter Block, and he uses this language to avoid saying that the outside property owner. He doesn't want to say that they have a positive obligation, right? Because there are no positive obligations is the thing that everybody says. So he says, if they don't want to be evil, if they don't want to infringe, he wouldn't say evil, that's my language. If they don't want to violate the non-aggression principle, then they have to allow some kind of easement for travel coming and going to the inner property owner. So that's his way of saying that it's a negative obligation to not use your property in a way to hurt people. The other way to say that is just to say, like, you have a positive obligation to not hurt people. Like, you can say it both ways. That's my entire point, is the positive versus negative is just how you formulate the words.
But don't get me wrong. I think that I think that to be polite, if you're in the donut hole, that you have sort of a at least societal obligation to be like, hey, guy, I'm going to have to cross your land to leave. Where would be the best spot? You know, so you're not like trampling crops or something stupid, you know?
I mean, that would be polite.
Like that would be a polite thing.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? But yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Like that solves not just that problem, but also water rights problems and stuff like that. Which was another question I had, I guess.
What was it?
I didn't think about until now. The water rights problems, but it's solved by the same solution. Like you don't have the right to use your property to infringe on somebody else's.
Yeah. Now I want to address another thing that people get wrong about the donut thing. And I don't want to say that this is Block's position, but multiple people have told me this is his position. So I'm going to assume that somebody holds this position, and now I'm going to attack it. They say that the outer property owner is not allowed to homestead that last little bit of property that would complete the donut. Because if he did, that the moment he completed the circle, he would be infringing.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. I don't think that even solves the problem to begin with, because that sliver would be probably owned by somebody. Like you're going to run into in an Ancapistan world enough situations where in order to leave an area, you have to cross at least somebody's property. You know what I'm saying? Like it might be person A, B, or C. You might have options, but you have to cross at least one of theirs properties.
Well, you're not going to buy a house unless, you know, part of the sale contract includes a road and, you know, access to your house for the next 500 years or whatever, you know, an access road. You're just not going to buy a house that you don't have guaranteed access to. That would be dumb. It's just something that we don't think about today because we all have communistic roads everywhere, right?
True, but I mean, at the same time, it's like, well, who would own those roads? You know what I mean? And like,
I was just gonna, the rebuttal I was gonna.
Will it end up being like a Facebook situation where they're like, oh, well, you don't share the same political beliefs as me, so you do not have the right to leave your house because you can't use the road, you know, or something stupid.
The problem is if ownership means the right to exclude somebody from the use of a thing, which I really think that's the best definition I've ever heard. Then I think
that's a good definition.
Then when you allow the inner property owner to exclude the outer property owner from the ownership or use of that little sliver that would complete the circle, you've just de facto given ownership to the inner property owner. You haven't left a piece of unowned land. You've just given exclusive control to the guy in the middle.
Yeah. But not just that, really, it doesn't even solve the problem to begin with.
Right.
You know, as I point out, like you'll have to cross somebody's land eventually to leave. Right. Even if that person explicitly gave consent to you when selling you the land, like, hey, here's a road. It's, you know, I mean, I think, what was it now? There's actually an alley attached to my property that I'm not entirely 100% sure is still property of the city. Like I was told by the previous property owner, it was absorbed into my land. I'm like, and two of my neighbors use it. I'm perfectly fine with that. Like, why would I care?
Well, that's the other thing. Like, let's say you do have rightful ownership of it, and let's say you chose to be like, okay, you guys can't use my road to get to your houses anymore. You'd be ostracized for that pretty quickly. Oh, yeah. Like, that's some serious stuff, right?
Now that's like, yeah.
Now, like other reasonable things would be to be like, look, I need help paying for this thing to keep it up, to maintain it. So if you guys don't chip in, then I will keep you from using it, right?
That would be
stuff like that. All right. Did you have anything else along those veins, or should we open it up, see if somebody else is interested in? Do we have any other topics?
Time to open up. You answered that quite well.